Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is when you are able to click on this link. This is Sam Korsmoe. I am the founder and the president of YESPI, Yellowstone English Environmental Study Program International. And this is one of our projects, which is selling Montana raised beef to the largest market in the world. We believe it's a very unique opportunity for Montana. So this is the webinar that I had written about before. And instead of being in a webinar, we're going to do it on YouTube. So the basic outline of what we're going to talk about here is there. Tell you a bit about who we are, the market size here in China, the various stories that we can tell, some more information about China, our Fish 50 program, our pricing model, a bit of our team. So I'm not going to go through that webinar here on this spot, but you can always go back and take a look. But that's the general outline of where I'm going with this video. This is a series of images and logos of who we are. Upper left corner there, YESPI, that's our education company. Right there in the middle is something called Montana Black, which was a failed attempt that I had in building a local branded beef project in southwest Montana. That was when I was the director of the Madison County Economic Development Council. On the left side, Wyatt Center, on the right side, the Madison Valley Medical Center. Those are two projects that I worked on while I was the director of the Madison County Development Center and the West Yellowstone Economic Development Council. At the bottom there are my partners here in China. They have been involved with Canada Wood and basically selling wood frame home construction and wood from Canada into China. So we kind of have the both sides of the pond somewhat covered, if you will. Myself in Montana, my partners in China, and all three of us go back and forth. And I'll tell you a bit more about my other partners. So, project at hand, exporting American beef to the largest market in the world. So, China. Right now, it is the second largest economy in the world, $12 trillion. So within the next 10, 15, 20, whatever it is, it will become the largest economy in the world. That's just a matter of time. However, in terms of GDP per capita, it's nowhere near the top, 72nd. So this reflects, obviously, the population of China, but it also reflects that a good part of China is still quite poor. It is still very much a developing country. So despite its overall size of economy and people, on a per capita basis, it's not really a world leader. Beef consumption, though, has grown dramatically in the last 5 years. You can see the numbers there, and that rapid increase is largely due to increased income, increased household wealth, and an increased attention to a higher, better quality diet amongst a lot of Chinese people. And here's the rub, though. Chinese ranchers cannot feed their own people. They cannot supply their own market. And so that increase that has occurred over the last 5 years is largely because of imports. So you could see 5 years ago, somewhere around 90,000 metric tons of imports. This year, they're expecting around 1 million metric tons of imports. Another interesting stat here is the last time the market was open for U.S. beef, total imports were somewhere around $15 million, of which $10 million came from the United States. This year, $2.5 billion in imports. So our timing is good for this market to be open to an American beef. There's going to be a lot of room to grow, a lot of opportunities. So where do we sit? Where do we sit in Montana? Well, what I believe that we have an advantage of is that we can tell a very good story about who we are, about what our cattle are all about, what our beef is all about. Some of you will recognize immediately these series of images, and certainly the quote from Paul Harvey. This is from that Super Bowl commercial that occurred a few years back. And I remember watching that commercial the very, very first time, and then I rewatched it several times online. And it's a heartfelt message because we have a good story. And I think we can tell that story here in this market to our benefit. And it's a story that, frankly, the commodity beef industry cannot tell because they don't have a story, or certainly not a very compelling one. So this image here of a feedlot somewhere in the Midwest is part of the commodity beef story. Compare that to the Montana natural beef story. Here's what our story could look like. the backdrop of the mountains, the backdrop of the deep grass, the backdrop of the clean air, the pristine environment. That is part of our story. And you compare the commodity beef story with the natural beef story, natural beef from Montana story, I think we're going to win that comparison. So, China itself, here's a map of China. It's geographically roughly the same size as the United States, but obviously many, many more people, 3 times more, 1.4 billion people. I want to point out at least 2 things here. Number one is most of the population lives on the eastern side of China. Those cities there you see listed. In the central area, Langzhou, Xi'an, Chengdu, that is somewhat of the breadbasket of China. And all of the west, western China, is largely desert. Not many people there, not many cities there, not much economic activity out there because it's desert. So imagine you take the United States, because China and the United States geographically are about the same size, and you put 1.4 billion people east of the Mississippi. That's a very, very crowded area. That's kind of how you can look at China. Same size as the US, but most of the people are in the east. World's largest exporter of goods, second largest importer of goods, and very, very active internet platforms here, which I'll talk about here later on. But that's a picture of what China's all about. So how about the market? So you always read 1.4 billion people. Oh my God, there's so many people here. So where do they live? Well, first off, as of about 5 years ago, China is more than 50% urban. Up until 5 years ago, over half the people still lived in the countryside, still lived on farms. Now it's urbanized. 1/2 the population is urbanized. And the way that experienced China people, business people, look at China is in tiered cities. So you have your first tier cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, very, very large metropolises, very developed economies, lots of businesses, extensive, for example, airports, train system, metro systems. This is where a lot of stuff is happening. And then you have second tier cities, smaller in size, but also quite active, also fairly developed infrastructure. And then third tier cities, less so, smaller, less developed infrastructure, less developed everything. So one way to look at this is, where are the Starbucks? Are there Starbucks in third tier cities? The answer is maybe 2 or 3. Whereas in second tier there's some, and in first tier there's one seemingly opening up every other week. So when you look at China, you should be looking at it in the sense of first, second, or third tier cities. When you develop a sales strategy or a marketing strategy for China or an investment strategy for China, you should do the same thing. Do you have a second tier strategy or a third tier strategy or a first tier strategy? The level of competition in each is different. There's different pieces of that, benefits and cost and benefits of that approach. But at any rate, what you do not do is look at China as a nation of 1.4 billion customers for your project. You look at China as, okay, I'm going to have a second tier city strategy. I'm going to focus on Chengdu with 18 million people. That is in Sichuan province, which is in the southwest part of China. That is a tangible goal that you can get your hands around, as opposed to 1.4 billion people. So we're going to move forward with a tiered strategy. So some priorities of the Chinese families. Number one, clearly, is the environment. Burn less coal, invest more in renewables. That is a mandate that is coming out of everyone's home, saying we have to clean up our air. We have to clean up our water. Enough of the environmental degradation of our country. And so you ask anybody, what's your biggest concern? It's going to be the environment. Second is education, which used to be first, has been the highest priority pretty much through all of Chinese history. Invest in your education of your children. In most families' case, they only have one child, and so that's where the investment is. So right now, there's about 500,000 Chinese students in American universities right at this time. And that's what YESPI does. We work in that market space. The third priority is probably food safety. And it's a priority because it's such a big country, and it's so decentralized in some ways for the food system, and so much food has to be produced. A lot of people have been burned. Several years ago, there was a milk powder scandal that had thousands and thousands of victims. And things like this led to, several years ago, about 5 years ago, the purchase of Smithfield Foods, which is a large pork processor out of Illinois. What drove that purchase was a few things: a more stable supply of pork, a cleaner technology, better management practices, and probably most importantly, the brand, the Smithfield's brand, the American brand. And that brand and that trademark and everything that carries with a good brand, bring that into China, the Chinese consumer will trust that more. So that again is an opportunity for us to establish a really strong Montana brand of a product that will engender feelings of security, feelings of trust. Social media in China is one of the ways to do that. The first one I want to bring to your attention is something called WeChat. It's like a combination of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter, and it is enormous. It is used by seemingly everyone in this country for all kinds of things. For example, I rarely carry cash anymore because I pay for everything using my WeChat account on my phone. So take a look at that. It's definitely worth it, and in one way or another, it will be part of our marketing and sales strategy. Second, Youku and QQ. Youku is something like YouTube, and QQ is something like Yahoo Mail or Gmail. So most Chinese will have an email account, and it will be a QQ account. And the Youku part, I mentioned it here. I mean, there's some numbers there. Some of that data is old, obviously, but I mention it here because that is where people can have a visual image, a visual image of, say, commodity beef in America. What does a feedlot in Kansas look like? And as you can imagine, that's not going to be a very pretty picture compared to what does a naturally raised product in Montana look like as it's growing up. That's where we have our backdrop of Yellowstone, or the Madison Range, or the Rocky Mountain Front, and so on. Lastly, Alibaba. That's something like Amazon.com. It's owned by a guy named Jack Ma, who's China's richest man. And what's significant about Alibaba is that it's essentially a platform of which all kinds of apps and other businesses are built upon. So the very, very active e-commerce sector that we have here, a lot of that is on top of Alibaba. And what's important about this, and why Jack Ma is important, is that he is one of the leaders to pursue trademark and copyright protection of all products. So if you're selling products on Alibaba, you better have the integrity of the product. China for years, and even now, is famous for copying technology, slapping their own label on it, and selling it as their own. And Ma, like a number of Chinese leaders, Chinese business leaders, are saying, we can't do that anymore. We have to start inventing our own thing. We can't just take other people's stuff and copy it and call it our own. Mm-hmm. And so people who try to do that on Alibaba do get busted, and they get thrown off the platform. Okay, so let's get into the nuts of what's possible here. And I want to introduce a potential model for us to look at, and that's Kobe beef. I'm sure all of you know about Kobe beef. You may not know too much about the city itself. This is an image of Kobe, Japan. It's the 6th largest city in Japan. Kobe proper, 1.6 million people. Greater Kobe, probably a couple million. My point here, though, is that hardly is an image of a Western ranching, cattle-raising type environment. Yet, the people of Kobe have managed to take that image and produce this, Kobe beef. A highly marbled beef product. The cattle eat a lot of grain, yet it's world famous. People around the world wait in line and pay significant sums for Kobe beef because it's a niche product. It's obtained that kind of niche level of market appreciation that people are willing to do that. So if Kobe can do that, why can't we do the same thing? Because here's our backdrop. That's the Rocky Mountain Front. I'm from Great Falls, and we had a cabin up near Augusta, so I'm very familiar with that image right there. And that is part of our backdrop. So how about we take that backdrop and we say Montana beef, this is where it comes from, and this is what it is. So you create a dining experience, you create a niche product that is appreciated by the consumer in the same way that Kobe beef is appreciated by the consumer. It's a different product, but the idea is the same. It comes from a particular part of the world, and that is high quality. That is taste. That is healthy. And so that, I think, is our advantage. So how do we get into the market? I'll just go over three concepts, three potential models. First is B2B, business to business, where basically we'll be working with trading companies to ship in full halves, maybe live animals. It goes directly to restaurants. It goes directly to marketers and distributing companies. And they take the product and they distribute it to the customer base. So they're the ones that bring it in and then distribute it. And so they're the ones, in that sense, who are responsible for telling the Montana story. B2C, business to consumer, is we tell our own story. We have a presence on the mall. We create a boxed beef product of some sort, maybe add something with it, and we tell the Montana story with our beef. And so we go directly to the consumer. Other models might be, say, some kind of CSA, community supported agriculture. Maybe there's purchase of animals outright. Ranch tours, perhaps importers, trading companies, and even restaurants, and even consumers. They come to Montana, they visit your ranch, they visit their animal perhaps. And then of course, in all of this is the opportunity for investment, where Chinese companies, just like they did with Smithfields, they actually invest in some kind of processing perhaps in Montana. So these are some ideas. So to get started, we want to go first because summer from Montana has to go first, and we're ready to do that. To do that, we're trying to build something we call the First 50 program. It's a pilot program of ideally around 10 ranchers that come up with 50 cows. That's it, 50 cows. And trust me, I understand that's not very many cows, but you gotta get started somewhere. So we want to talk to somewhere around 10 ranchers who come up with 50 cows, bring those cows to a Chinese importer, and get those cows to the Chinese consumer. 50 cows. Let's get started. Let's go from there, and let's see what we learn as we go along the way. So how do we pay for that in terms of yourselves? How do you get compensated for those 50 animals that you're willing to put up? So what we want to buy are 1,200-pound 2-year-olds, naturally raised. And so that is what the market is asking for, and that's what we want to supply. And our pricing model for that is called CP++. CP, calf price. How much wood have you made had you sold that calf in the fall? So your calves drop in, say, February, and they get weaned in October, and sometime around then, October, November, they're on a truck and they're off to Kansas. You're done. You got your calf check. So I want to know what that number is. What is that calf check? So that's the first CP. That's the first part of the CP++. Second is the first plus, the feeding operations. Because it has to be a 2-year-old. It has to weigh 1,200 pounds. So there's at least 3 steps. Winter feeding, summer grass, and finishing. And each of those will have an AUM figure attached to that. What is that AUM? And you see there some rough time frames, some rough ages, and some expected weight gains. But bottom line, by the end of the process, by the end of the 24 months, you have a 1,200-pound animal that's been naturally raised. And I want to know, what is the cost of feeding that animal out? And the final plus is, why are you doing this? What is your profit margin for participating in the program? Is it a flat fee per animal? Is it a percentage? Is it a share of the wholesale price? Some other idea? But this is where we want to go. What does a rancher earn for raising a naturally raised animal? Calf price plus feeding costs plus profit margin. CP++. That is where we're trying to head with this program. So take a look at that. If you want to, I would really love to hear, what is your AUM numbers? What would you expect to receive for an animal? So who are we? We is myself, Sam Korsmoe. I'm a native of Great Falls. I'm right there in the middle. I went to MSU, and for my master's degree, I went to the University of Washington. My partner, Francis Wong, he's from upstate New York. He went to Penn, and then he went to Johns Hopkins for his master's. He's an American, but he's been here in Shanghai for nearly 15 years. Speaks fluent Chinese. And then our other partner, Sally, is from here. She's a native of Shanghai. And so she speaks Shanghainese fluently, she speaks Mandarin fluently, and she speaks English fluently. So she's from here, but she actually has Montana roots in a way because her son graduated from Mount Ellis Academy in Bozeman, Montana. And he's now at a university in Canada. And so all three of us are friends, all three of us are partners. We actually live fairly close to each other. And we've all been to Montana. Sally's been there several times. Francis has been there like 5 years in a row for the YESPI program. So we have bases, we have contact structures on both sides of the ocean to see this project through. So our next steps. Step number 1, we're working now to get some samples in. We want to get that done as soon as we can. Ship some samples in so we have some Montana natural beef products here in our hands here in Shanghai. Step 2, do a cooking demo by the end of the year. So restaurateurs, traders, importers, marketeers, maybe consumers, they get a chance to taste and test a Montana beef product. Hopefully by the middle of next year, we've recruited the producers for the first 50 program. So we have some idea of who's involved, how many animals they can commit, get that started. And hopefully, also by the middle of next year, we can host some ranch tours. We can bring some Chinese people over to take a look at your operations, to take a look at your cattle. Of course, they go to Yellowstone Park, they visit Montana, they do all these different things. But you start to build a relationship with the buyer of Montana cattle. And then, of course, we start selling. We find customers. We start moving product somewhere in the first, second quarter of next year. So those are the next steps that we're going to be pursuing. And that's about it. That's all I got, guys. I apologize I wasn't able to set up a webinar which would allow for some maybe give and take, but at least now you have an overview. You've had a chance to take a look at what I've presented here. You can go back and watch it again. And as you come up with questions, send me an email. Give me a call. And we can set up a Skype ID. You got my numbers there. So I really appreciate your time with this. I look forward to working with all of you. And I look forward to representing Montana here in China, the largest market in the world. Have a good evening, folks. Bye-bye.